In the age of trail cameras and wildlife monitoring, there exist recordings so disturbing that park services have buried them in classified files. These are not blurry photos. These are crystal clear videos that show something so impossible, so terrifying, that cryptozoologists refuse to release them publicly. Today, we will examine the most terrifying Bigfoot encounters ever caught on camera. Footages that reveals a truth, and too frightening for the world to accept, that we are not alone in these forests, and whatever is stalking us from the tree line is far more intelligent and dangerous than we ever imagined. On March 17, 2025, Brian thought he filmed a bear, but instead captured the most terrifying creature on planet Earth. The disgustingly large Sasquatch didn't hesitate and went after him, and what investigators later discovered about his sighting turned this story into the darkest Bigfoot encounter ever seen. When Brian Phillips parked at the Farley's Prairie trailhead in Ocala National Forest around 2 p.m., planning a simple 4-mile loop through the pine flatwoods. The temperature sat at 73 degrees, and the forest was unusually quiet. He had covered roughly a mile and a half when he noticed something moving through the palmetto scrub approximately 200 feet ahead. His first assumption was a black bear, common in this part of the forest. Black bears were frequently sighted in Ocala National Forest, especially during spring when they emerged from their winter dens. He stopped walking and reached for his phone, more out of excitement than concern. The figure moved between two longleaf pines, and Brian activated his camera. Through the screen, he watched as the shape emerged into a small clearing. It was walking upright. The stride was too long, the proportions completely wrong for a human. The shoulders were massive, easily 3 feet across. Brian estimated the height at around 7.5 feet, though the uneven terrain made precision difficult. Dark brown hair covered the entire body, matted and thick. It moved with purpose, not the shambling gait of a bear on its hind legs. Bears could walk upright for short distances, but their movement was clumsy, unstable. This was different. Each step looked natural, balanced, as if walking on 2 legs was its primary mode of movement. Brian kept the phone steady, trying to capture as much detail as possible. The creature moved through dappled sunlight, filtering through the pine canopy. In the brighter patches, the hair appeared lighter, almost reddish-brown. In the shadows, it looked nearly black. The head sat directly on the shoulders with almost no visible neck. When the creature turned slightly, Brian could see the profile. The forehead sloped back sharply from the pronounced brow. The jaw jutted forward. It was not a bear. It was not a person. Brian's recording shows 47 seconds of this initial sighting. The creature moved from left to right across the clearing, never looking in his direction. Its arms swung naturally at its sides, longer than human arms, reaching past where the knees would be. The legs were thick and powerful, each step covering nearly 4 feet of ground. When it reached the far tree line, it paused. The head turned slightly, profile visible for just 3 seconds. The face showed a pronounced brow ridge and a flat nose. Then it disappeared into the dense understory. Every instinct told Brian to return to his vehicle. The parking area was less than 2 miles back. He could be there in 30 minutes at a quick pace. Instead, he moved forward. He would later tell investigators that something compelled him to follow, a curiosity that overrode his fear. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Whatever he had just seen, it was real, and it was in front of him. He stayed on the trail for another 100 feet, then stepped off into the palmetto. The creature had left disturbed vegetation, bent fronds showing the direction of travel. The path was unmistakable. Something large had pushed through here, and recently. Brian kept his phone raised, recording continuously now. The footage shows his hands shaking, the image bouncing with each step. The palmetto grew thicker off trail, the stiff fronds reaching waist-high. They scraped against his pants and grabbed at his boots. Progress was slow. He had to push through with his free hand while keeping the camera up with his right. Sweat began to form on his forehead, despite the moderate temperature. The exertion combined with adrenaline made his breathing heavier. He tracked the disturbances for roughly 300 feet, moving deeper into an area where the pines grew denser and the understory thickened with saw palmetto and gallberry. The canopy blocked much of the afternoon sun. Shadows stretched across the forest floor. The temperature felt cooler here, away from direct sunlight. His video timestamp showed 2:17 p.m. when he stopped again. Something had changed in the forest. The usual sounds, the distant birds and rustling of small animals, had ceased completely. Brian panned his camera slowly from left to right. The recording captured his breathing, faster now, and the crunch of dry pine needles under his boots. He stood completely still, listening. Nothing. The silence felt heavy, oppressive. Movement flickered in his peripheral vision. He spun left, camera following. The creature stood 80 feet away, partially obscured by a dead pine. But it was facing him now. The footage shows a clear frontal view for nearly 8 seconds. The body was broader than any human, the chest barrel-shaped and covered in dark hair that appeared lighter around the face. The arms hung at its sides, hands visible, each finger clearly defined. The hands looked almost human in structure, but larger, much larger. Each hand appeared to be at least 12 inches long. The face stared directly at the camera. The eyes were dark, sunken beneath that heavy brow ridge. Brian froze. The creature did not move. It simply watched him, standing perfectly still in a way that felt deliberate, patient. Then it stepped out from behind the tree. The full height became apparent. Brian's angle, shooting slightly upward, confirmed this thing stood well over 7 feet tall. The legs were thick, powerful, built for strength rather than speed. Or so Brian thought. It took 2 steps forward, closing the distance to about 70 feet. Each step was measured, controlled. Brian's camera lowered slightly, his arm wavering. The footage becomes less steady. His hands were shaking more now. The creature took another step. Brian backed up. His boot caught on something, a root or vine hidden under the pine needles, and the camera jerked as he caught himself. He stumbled but did not fall. When he raised the phone again, the creature had moved. It was now 50 feet away. It had covered 20 feet in the second or two when Brian's camera was down. The speed was wrong. Something that large should not be able to move that quickly, that quietly. The recording shows Brian turning and walking quickly back the way he came. He kept the camera pointed behind him, over his shoulder. The creature followed. It matched his pace, maintaining the 50-foot distance. The spacing felt intentional, not close enough to be an immediate threat, but close enough to maintain pressure. Brian increased his speed. The creature did the same. Its movements remained smooth, efficient. The footage captured nearly 2 minutes of this pursuit. The creature never closed the gap further, but it never fell behind. It walked with the same steady, powerful stride. Its head remained fixed on Brian, tracking his movement through the forest. The eyes never left him. Brian glanced forward to navigate, then back to check the creature's position. Each time he looked back, it was still there, still maintaining that exact distance. The precision felt wrong. Animals did not behave this way. They either attacked or they fled. This was something else entirely. Brian reached the area where he first left the trail. He scrambled up onto the path, nearly dropping his phone. The footage shows dirt and vegetation, then the trail ahead as he turned to run. He looked back one more time. The creature stood at the edge of the trail, 40 feet away now. It had stopped moving. Brian ran. The recording went dark as he shoved the phone in his pocket, but the audio continued. His breathing came in gasps, his footsteps pounding on the hard-packed sand trail. The audio captured something else. A sound that started low, almost a rumble, then rose in pitch. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds, unlike anything in the Florida wilderness. Not a bear, not a panther, not any known animal. The vocalization seemed to come from multiple directions, echoing through the pines. Brian's running footsteps stuttered, slowed. The camera came back out of his pocket. The footage shows the trail ahead, empty. Brian turned in a full circle, nothing visible in any direction. He moved forward again, no longer running but walking fast. His breathing had settled slightly. The trail curved ahead, returning toward the prairie. Brian checked behind him every few seconds. The forest remained empty, but something felt wrong. He later described it as a pressure, a sense of being watched from all sides. The footage shows him scanning the tree line continuously. At 2:31 p.m., roughly 14 minutes after the initial sighting, he was approximately half a mile from his vehicle. A crack echoed through the forest. The sound was sharp, loud like a gunshot. Brian spun toward the sound. His camera captured a pine branch, easily 6 inches in diameter, falling to the trail 30 feet ahead. It hit the ground with a heavy thud that sent up dust. The branch had broken cleanly, snapped near the trunk. There was no wind. The air was still. Pine branches did not simply break on their own. Brian approached slowly, his footsteps hesitant. The footage shows him looking up into the canopy. The tree where the branch had broken stood at least 40 feet tall. Nothing visible in the upper branches. No movement? He stepped around the branch and continued. His pace had slowed considerably now. He checked the forest on both sides constantly. 20 feet later, another crack. This time from the right side of the trail. Another branch, this one even larger, perhaps 8 inches across. It crashed through the understory, breaking smaller branches on its way down. It landed 15 feet from where Brian stood. The impact shook the ground slightly. Brian could feel it through his boots. He stopped walking completely. His breathing was audible on the recording now, coming in short, quick bursts. He raised his camera, filming the forest on both sides. The footage shows dense vegetation, shadows between the trees. The palmetto was too thick to see more than 20 feet in most directions. He called out, asking if anyone was there. His voice carried through the quiet forest, sounding small and uncertain. No response came, not a sound. He waited for perhaps 15 seconds, the camera still rolling. Nothing. He started moving again, faster now. His walk was almost a jog. The trail straightened ahead, offering a clear view for perhaps 100 feet. Brian focused on that distant section, on reaching open ground. If he could get back to the prairie, to the trailhead, he would be safe. The parking area felt impossibly far away now, though it was less than half a mile. The third branch came from directly overhead. The crack was louder, sharper. It sounded closer. Brian looked up just as it fell. The footage captured his dive to the side, the camera swinging wildly. Sky, trees, ground, all blurred together. He hit the ground hard, landing on his left side. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. The phone flew from his hand, tumbling through the air. It landed in the palmetto, camera facing the trail. The branch, nearly 8 feet long and as thick as a man's thigh, slammed into the trail where he had been standing. The impact sent up a cloud of dust and pine needles. If Brian had not moved, if he had been even a second slower, the branch would have struck him directly. The phone landed in the palmetto, camera facing the trail. The angle showed Brian on his hands and knees, scrambling to his feet. He looked up into the canopy, then all around. His mouth moved, words inaudible on the recording. He stepped toward where the phone lay, reaching down. Before he could grab it, a rock struck the ground 3 feet from the phone. The rock hit with force, embedding itself slightly in the soft sand. Then another, landing between Brian and the device. The rocks were substantial, each the size of a softball. They came from the right side of the trail. Brian jerked back, stumbling. A third rock hit closer to the phone, then a fourth. They formed a pattern, a line across the trail. Brian changed direction, moving left, circling to reach his phone from a different angle. More rocks pelted the trail, 5 more in rapid succession. They fell with precision, each one landing exactly where Brian was trying to move. They formed a line, as if thrown deliberately to block his path. The spacing was too exact to be random. Brian stopped. He stared in the direction the rocks were coming from. The footage, from its position in the undergrowth, captured his profile. His body language showed tension, hands raised slightly in front of him. Defensive. He took a step back, then another. His head turned slowly, scanning the tree line, looking for the source. Something massive moved through the palmetto on the right side of the trail. The vegetation shook violently, fronds bending and breaking. Something large was pushing through, and it was not being careful about stealth anymore. The sound grew louder, closer. Brian turned to run. The footage captured his legs as he passed the phone, sprinting down the trail. His boots kicked up sand with each stride. The sounds of breaking vegetation grew louder. Whatever was in the forest was moving fast, parallel to the trail. The palmetto rattled and shook along a 30-foot section. Brian's footsteps faded slightly as he got further from the phone. His breathing was ragged, panicked. The sound of breaking branches continued, getting closer to the camera's position. The entire understory seemed to be moving. Then it appeared. The creature stepped out of the palmetto 20 feet from where the phone lay. The angle captured it from roughly waist height. The massive legs, trunk-like and covered in dark hair. Each leg was thicker than any human thigh, the muscles visible even through the hair as it moved. The arms hanging forward slightly, the hands flexed, fingers spreading and closing. It turned its head, looking down the trail in the direction Brian had gone. The face was fully visible for nearly 4 seconds, heavy brow ridge casting shadows over the eyes, deep-set eyes that reflected light slightly, giving them an almost luminous quality. Flat nose with large nostrils that flared as it breathed. The mouth was closed, the jaw prominent and strong. Hair covered most of the face, but thinned around the eyes and mouth, revealing dark skin underneath. The expression was not aggressive, but focused, intelligent. The eyes showed awareness, calculation. The creature took 3 steps onto the trail, each footfall visible in the frame. The feet were enormous, easily 18 inches long, wider than a human foot. The toes splayed out with each step, gripping the sand. 5 toes were clearly visible on the left foot as it lifted. The foot flexed naturally, the arch visible. These were not bear paws, not costume pieces. The movement was too natural, too complex. The creature paused in the middle of the trail, turned its head back toward the camera for just a moment. The eyes seemed to look directly at the lens. Then it looked down the trail again, toward where Brian had disappeared. It dropped into a forward stance, weight shifting onto the balls of its feet. The knees bent slightly. The arms came up, hands positioned forward. Then it ran. The speed was shocking. The creature covered ground faster than seemed possible for something so large. Its gait was not quite human, the stride too long, each step covering nearly 6 feet. The arm swing was too pronounced, the arms pumping with tremendous force. But it was clearly bipedal running, not the quadrupedal gallop of a bear. The power in each stride was visible in how its feet struck the ground, sending up small clouds of sand. Within 3 seconds, it had disappeared around the curve in the trail. The sound of its footfalls continued for several seconds more, heavy thuds that faded into the distance. The forest fell silent again. The phone continued recording from its position in the palmetto, showing only the empty trail and the rocks scattered across the sand. Small clouds of dust still hung in the air where the creature had run. 43 seconds later, a scream cut through the forest. It was human, Brian's voice coming from perhaps 200 feet away. The scream was raw, primal, filled with terror and pain. It lasted 2 seconds, then cut off abruptly. Impact sounds followed, something heavy hitting the ground. A grunt, distinctly human. More sounds of struggle, breaking vegetation, thrashing, then silence again. Complete silence. The phone recorded nothing but that silence for nearly 30 seconds. No birds, no insects, nothing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped. The forest held its breath. Movement appeared at the edge of the frame. Brian came into view, crawling on the trail. He was bleeding from his forehead, blood running down the left side of his face. The cut was deep, possibly from hitting the ground or a rock. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, the fabric hanging loose. Scratches covered his exposed shoulder, some deep enough to bleed. He crawled toward the phone, each movement showing pain. His left arm dragged slightly, not moving correctly. The shoulder hung at an odd angle, dislocated. He reached the phone, grabbed it with his right hand. His fingers were shaking, barely able to grip. The camera swung up, showing his face for just a moment. The blood, the wide eyes, the dirt caked on his right cheek. His mouth was open, breathing hard. Then the footage went dark as he pulled the phone close to his chest, curling around it protectively. The audio continued. Brian's breathing was ragged, gasping. Each breath sounded painful, catching in his throat. Footsteps approached, heavy and deliberate. Not running now. Walking. Slow. Each footfall was distinct, spaced several feet apart. They stopped close, very close, perhaps 3 feet from where Brian lay. A new sound emerged, a breathing that was not Brian's. Deeper, slower, resonating. It came from directly above the microphone. Something was standing over him. The breathing was steady, controlled. Whatever stood there was not winded from the chase. Brian's breathing stopped as if he was holding his breath, trying to be completely still. The other breathing continued, a sniffing sound, like an animal investigating something. Long inhalations, processing scent. This continued for nearly 20 seconds. Each second must have felt like an eternity for Brian, lying there wounded with something massive standing over him. A low sound, almost a grunt, came from whatever was standing above Brian. The tone was neither aggressive nor curious. It sounded almost satisfied, confirmatory. Then the heavy footsteps again, moving away. Each step clearly audible. They grew fainter but did not hurry. The creature was walking, not running. The footsteps stopped somewhere in the distance, still close enough to hear, perhaps 40 feet away. Brian's breathing resumed, sharp and quick, hyperventilating. He did not move. The audio captured him lying there for another minute, maybe longer. His breathing slowly steadied, though it remained fast. Finally, movement, fabric rustling, the sound of him sitting up, a groan of pain. His voice, barely a whisper, words unclear. Could have been prayer? Could have been nothing? The camera came back up, pointing ahead. The footage showed the trail, empty now. Brian panned right, then left. Nothing visible. He struggled to his feet, the camera shaking violently. Getting up took nearly 10 seconds. Each movement was agony. His left ankle gave out the first time he tried to stand, and he dropped back to one knee with a gasp. On the second attempt, he made it upright, but could not put full weight on the left leg. He started moving, limping badly. His left leg was not working properly. The ankle was either badly sprained or broken. Each step came with a grunt of pain. The camera pointed down at the trail, showing his boots and the sand passing beneath. Blood dripped from his forehead, leaving dark spots on the sand. He moved perhaps 30 feet, each step slower than the last. Then he stopped. He raised the camera again. The creature stood in the trail ahead. The distance was hard to judge from the footage, but investigators later estimated roughly 60 feet based on known trail features visible in the frame. It faced Brian directly, standing in the center of the trail. The lighting was better here, the canopy thinner. Late afternoon sun filtered through, illuminating the creature clearly. The footage captured details that had been obscured in shadows before. The massive shoulders, the broad chest rising and falling with breath. The arms, so much longer than human proportions, hanging relaxed at its sides. The face, mostly hair-covered, but the eyes visible. Dark eyes, watching. Not black like a bear's eyes, but dark brown, almost human in color. The creature's chest moved with its breathing, slow and steady. It shifted its weight from one foot to the other, a subtle movement, but distinctly visible. It did not advance. It simply stood there, blocking the trail, watching Brian with what could only be described as curiosity. Brian took a step backward. His injured leg nearly buckled, but he caught himself. The creature did not react. Its head remained level, eyes fixed on Brian. Another step back. Brian's breathing was loud on the audio, each breath catching with pain. Still no movement from the creature. It waited. Brian turned and began moving away, faster now despite the limp. His body was running on pure adrenaline, overriding the pain signals. He kept the camera pointed behind him. The creature remained where it stood, watching him retreat. Its posture was relaxed, non-threatening. it made no move to follow. Brian covered roughly 40 feet, each step visible in the shaky footage. He fell once, going down hard on his right knee. The camera caught the impact, then sky as he nearly dropped the phone. He recovered, got back up, kept moving. When he glanced back once more, the creature was gone. The trail stood empty. No movement in the vegetation, no sound. It had simply disappeared, as if it had never been there at all. The remainder of the footage showed Brian's painful journey back to the trailhead. He fell twice more, the camera capturing the ground, then sky, then the trail again as he recovered. He never stopped checking behind him. The forest remained quiet, no signs of pursuit. At 2:49 p.m., he reached the parking area. His vehicle was the only one there. The footage showed him fumbling with his keys, dropping them once before getting the door open. The recording ended as he collapsed into the driver's seat. Brian drove directly to Advent Health Waterman in Tavares, 35 miles from the forest. Medical records show he arrived at 3:27 p.m. with lacerations to his scalp requiring 12 stitches, a dislocated left shoulder, severe bruising across his back and left side, and a sprained left ankle. The attending physician documented Brian's account of being attacked by an unknown animal while hiking. Brian turned over his phone to Tavares Police Department that evening. The footage, totaling 31 minutes and 47 seconds, underwent analysis by 3 separate wildlife experts. All confirmed the subject in the video was not a bear, not a person in a costume, and not any known animal in Florida. The proportions, movement patterns, and physical characteristics did not match any documented species. Frame-by-frame analysis of the clearest shots showed details impossible to fabricate with 2025 consumer technology, including individual hair movement, muscle definition beneath the hair, and micro-expressions in the facial features. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission investigated the location 3 days after the incident. Officers found disturbed vegetation consistent with Brian's account, broken branches at the reported locations, and impressions in soft ground near the trail. One clear track measured 17 inches long and 9 inches across at the widest point. Casting was attempted, but the ground conditions produced only a partial mold. The investigation report concluded that Brian had encountered something in Ocala National Forest, but could not determine what species. Brian Phillips recovered from his physical injuries within 8 weeks. He has refused all media requests and will not disclose the exact trail location beyond the general area of Farlow's Prairie. In his single statement to investigators, he described the moment the creature stood over him as the most terrifying experience of his life, not because of what it did, but because of what it chose not to do. The footage remains the clearest, most detailed Bigfoot evidence ever captured in Florida, and the only documented case of physical contact with injuries requiring medical treatment. On October 13, 2023, Emma Rodriguez had been in the Olympic National Forest for only 3 hours when she first heard the sound that would haunt her nightmares forever. The low, resonant call seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, vibrating through the ground beneath her feet and echoing from the trees themselves. She froze on the trail, her heart pounding as the sound repeated, too deep and too complex to be produced by any known animal, yet carrying an unmistakable intelligence that suggested communication rather than simple vocalization. The forest around her had fallen completely silent, as if every living creature was holding its breath in terror of what had just announced its presence. Emma's camera equipment began malfunctioning the moment she tried to record the strange vocalizations, her devices shutting down at seemingly random intervals, despite having functioned perfectly just minutes before. Her GPS readings showed impossible coordinates that placed her in locations that didn't exist on any map, while her compass spun wildly as if something was actively interfering with her technology. The silence that followed the creature's call was so complete, it seemed to press against her eardrums like a living thing, broken only by the sound of her own panicked breathing and the crunch of leaves beneath her trembling feet. But beneath that silence, Emma began to detect something else. The the almost imperceptible sound of something massive moving through the undergrowth with impossible stealth. When Emma finally worked up the courage to continue down the trail, she discovered massive footprints pressed deep into the soft earth. Prints that measured nearly 18 inches in length and showed clear evidence of opposable thumbs. The tracks formed a deliberate pattern around the area where she'd been standing, as if something had been circling her position while she remained frozen in terror. Most disturbing was the realization that whatever had made these prints had approached to within mere feet of where she stood, close enough to touch her. Yet she had never seen or heard its approach through the dense undergrowth. The depth of the impression suggested something that weighed over 600 pounds, moving with a grace that defied its massive size. Emma's attempts to leave the area were immediately frustrated by obstacles that seemed too coordinated to be coincidental. Fallen trees blocked the trail she'd used to enter the forest, positioned in ways that suggested deliberate placement rather than natural occurrence. Her satellite phone produced only static and interference that seemed to intensify whenever she tried to call for help, as if something was actively jamming her communications to prevent her from sharing her discoveries with the outside world. The isolation that had seemed appealing when she'd planned this expedition now felt like a trap, with Emma beginning to realize that she was no longer the observer in this situation, but rather the observed. Every step she took seemed to be anticipated, every route she chose blocked by obstacles that appeared too convenient to be natural. The first direct sighting came as Emma struggled to find an alternate route through the dense forest, her panic growing with each blocked path and dead end. Through the trees ahead, she caught a glimpse of something enormous moving between the massive trunks with impossible stealth, a figure that stood upright like a human but possessed proportions that suggested a creature of incredible size and strength. The being seemed to be studying her from a distance, its movements coordinated and purposeful as it paralleled her desperate attempts to escape. When Emma tried to focus her camera on the creature, the device immediately shut down, leaving her with only the terrifying memory of eyes that reflected the filtered sunlight with unmistakable intelligence, and what appeared to be curiosity about her presence in its domain. Emma's terror escalated when she realized that the creature was not alone. Sounds of movement from multiple directions indicated that she was surrounded by several large beings that were coordinating their activities with a precision that suggested advanced communication abilities. The forest itself seemed to be working against her escape, with branches that caught at her clothing in ways that seemed too deliberate to be accidental, and roots that appeared to shift position to trip her at crucial moments. Her attempts to document what was happening were frustrated by equipment failures that occurred at the most crucial moments, as if whatever was watching her understood the importance of preventing her from gathering evidence of their existence. The creatures seemed to possess an understanding of human technology that was both impressive and deeply unsettling. Emma's frantic escape became a blur of terror as the forest closed in around her. The deeper she ran, the more the landscape twisted. Paths vanished, landmarks shifted, and the air grew thick with the scent of earth and something musky. Every time she paused, she could hear the creatures moving just out of sight, their footfalls muffled, guttural calls echoing like a language meant for the trees. At one point, Emma tumbled down a slope into a shallow creek. The water was icy, shocking her back to her senses. She scrambled up, only to see a massive shadow pass silently along the ridge above. The creature paused, its silhouette framed by moonlight, and Emma felt its gaze settle on her like a physical weight. She pressed herself against the bank, barely daring to breathe, as the being let out a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through her bones. The chase resumed, but now the creatures were driving her, not just following, but steering her with uncanny precision. Whenever she tried to double back or hide, a branch would snap or a stone would be thrown, forcing her to change direction. She caught glimpses of more than one figure moving in parallel, their eyes glinting in the darkness, their movements impossibly fast and coordinated. Emma realized with dread that she was being herded toward a destination she could neither see nor understand. Suddenly, the forest opened into a wide, unnatural clearing. The ground was covered in spirals of stones and bones, and the trees around the perimeter were marked with deep gouges and strange symbols. The air was thick with anticipation, and Emma felt as if she had stepped into the center of some ancient ritual. The largest creature emerged from the shadows, standing at the edge of the clearing, its breath steaming in the cold night air. It raised its arms and let out a series of calls, each one answered by the others in a chorus that made the ground tremble. Emma stood frozen, her mind racing. Was this a warning? A test? The creatures circled the clearing, their eyes never leaving her, their movements deliberate and measured. For a moment, time seemed to stretch and warp, the world narrowing to the circle of stones and the silent, watching eyes. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the ritual ended. The creatures melted back into the forest, leaving Emma alone and trembling in the center of the clearing. She didn't wait to see if they would return. Driven by a surge of adrenaline, Emma fled into the darkness. The memory of the ritual burned into her mind. Even as she ran, she knew the forest was still watching, and that whatever had happened in that clearing was only a glimpse of a mystery that would never let her go. The psychological pressure of constant surveillance began to manifest in ways that Emma struggled to understand or control. She found herself anticipating the movements of her unseen watchers, adjusting her path to avoid areas where she sensed their presence, while simultaneously being herded along routes that led deeper into their territory. The creatures seemed to be learning from their observations of her behavior, adapting their tactics based on her responses, and becoming more sophisticated in their approach with each passing hour. Emma began to feel like a laboratory animal being studied by researchers whose intelligence far exceeded her own, trapped in an experiment whose purpose she couldn't begin to understand. The realization that she was being manipulated by something that could think and plan was more terrifying than simple predation. The most direct encounter came when Emma stumbled into a small clearing and found herself face to face with the massive creature that had been stalking her through the forest. The being stood over 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair that seemed to shimmer with an almost metallic quality in the filtered sunlight, with eyes that held an intelligence that was unmistakably aware and calculating. It studied her with the same intensity that she had been trying to use to study the forest, tilting its massive head as if trying to understand what kind of creature she was and what her intentions might be. The moment of eye contact lasted only seconds, but it left Emma with the chilling realization that she was being evaluated according to criteria she couldn't comprehend. The creature's expression seemed almost curious, as if it was encountering something as unusual to it as it was to her. Emma's attempt to slowly back away from the creature was met with a low vocalization that seemed to carry meaning, as if the being was trying to communicate something important or warn her about something she couldn't see. The sound was complex, with tonal variations that suggested it was part of a sophisticated language system, and Emma had the disturbing realization that the creature was actually trying to talk to her. When she continued to retreat, the creature's vocalizations became more insistent, and she could hear answering calls from the forest around her as other beings responded to what sounded like tactical coordination. The realization that she was surrounded by multiple intelligent creatures that were discussing her fate in a language she couldn't understand filled Emma with a terror that transcended anything she had ever experienced. The decision to run came when Emma heard the creatures beginning to move closer, their massive forms crashing through the underbrush with increasing boldness as they closed the distance between themselves and their subject. She turned and sprinted toward what she hoped was the direction of the main trail, her flight through the dark forest becoming a nightmare of stumbling over unseen obstacles and constantly looking over her shoulder for signs of pursuit. The creature's response was immediate and coordinated, with sounds of movement that indicated they were not willing to let their subject escape without a significant effort to recapture her. Their pursuit began with what sounded almost like disappointment, as if they had hoped for a different outcome from their attempted communication. The chase through the forest revealed the true extent of the creature's physical capabilities as they moved through the dense woodland with a speed and agility that seemed impossible for beings of their size. Emma could hear them crashing through the trees behind her, their pursuit coordinated in ways that suggested they were working together to cut off her escape routes and funnel her toward a destination of their choosing. The sounds of their movement indicated that they were not simply chasing her, but were actively herding her, using their superior knowledge of the terrain to guide her flight along paths that would eventually lead her back into their control. Their footsteps thundered through the forest with a rhythm that suggested they were matching each other's pace, working as a coordinated unit rather than individual predators. During her desperate flight, Emma began to notice that the very forest seemed to be conspiring with her pursuers, creating obstacles that slowed her progress while providing clear pathways for the creatures that hunted her through the darkness. Branches caught at her clothing with deliberate precision. Roots shifted to trip her at crucial moments, and the terrain itself seemed to funnel her toward areas where her pursuers could more easily corner her. Most disturbing was the growing realization that the sounds of pursuit were becoming more organized and strategic, with different voices calling to each other in what sounded like tactical coordination. The creatures were communicating constantly during the chase, sharing information about her location and coordinating their movements with military precision. As Emma stumbled through the undergrowth, her panic-stricken mind began to process details that her terror had initially obscured, fragments of understanding that painted an even more disturbing picture of her situation. The creatures pursuing her seemed to be using tools. She could hear the distinctive sounds of implements striking wood and stone, suggesting they possessed technology that no wild animal should have been able to create or use. Their vocalizations carried nuances that indicated not just communication, but complex language, with tonal variations that suggested they were discussing strategy and coordinating their efforts with a sophistication that rivaled human military operations. The realization that she was being hunted by something that could think, plan, and use tools was more terrifying than any simple animal attack. The forest around Emma began to take on an increasingly surreal quality as her flight continued, with shadows that moved independently of any visible source and sounds that seemed to come from directions that defied the laws of physics. She found herself running through areas that her rational mind insisted couldn't exist. Clearings that were perfectly circular despite being surrounded by ancient trees, streams that flowed uphill, and rock formations that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them. The pursuit behind her continued relentlessly, accompanied by phenomena that suggested the very fabric of reality was being manipulated by forces beyond her comprehension. The creatures seemed to possess abilities that went beyond simple physical prowess, as if they could influence the environment itself to aid in their hunt. Emma's terror reached new heights when she realized that her pursuers seemed to be enjoying the chase, their calls carrying what could only be described as amusement, as if her panic was providing them with entertainment rather than simply serving a practical purpose. The creatures appeared to be toying with her, allowing her to think she was escaping only to cut off her route and force her to change direction. Their superior knowledge of the terrain gave them an overwhelming advantage, and Emma began to understand that her flight was nothing more than another part of their experiment, a test of her responses under extreme stress rather than a genuine opportunity for freedom. The psychological warfare was as deliberate as their physical pursuit, designed to break down her resistance and force her into complete submission. At one point during the chase, Emma managed to climb a massive fallen tree that had created a natural bridge across a deep ravine, hoping to put some distance between herself and her pursuers. But as she reached the middle of the makeshift bridge, she heard the unmistakable sound of the creatures climbing up behind her with impossible agility. Their massive hands gripped the bark with ease, their powerful limbs propelling them up the trunk with a speed that defied their enormous size. Emma could hear their breathing growing closer, deep and rhythmic, like the sound of massive bellows. And she realized with growing horror that they were actually gaining on her, despite her head start. The creature's pursuit took on an almost playful quality, as they began to demonstrate abilities that seemed designed to showcase their superiority over their human prey. Emma watched in terror as one of the beings leaped from tree to tree with impossible grace, covering distances that should have been fatal for any creature of its size. Another seemed to be moving through the forest canopy above her, keeping pace with her desperate flight while remaining almost completely invisible among the dense foliage. The coordination between the creatures was so precise that Emma began to suspect they were communicating through methods she couldn't detect, perhaps using infrasonic frequencies or other signals that were beyond human perception. As Emma's energy waned, she stumbled into a clearing she didn't recognize, one that seemed impossibly ancient, the ground covered in spirals of stones and bones. The air was thick with the scent of moss and something musky, and the trees pressed in so tightly that the sky was only a memory. The creatures paused at the edge, watching her with a patience that felt almost ritualistic. For a moment, Emma felt as if she were the centerpiece of a ceremony, the subject of a gathering that had been waiting for her arrival for centuries. The largest of the beings stepped forward, raising its arms and letting out a guttural call that echoed through the trees, answered by the others in a chorus that made the ground vibrate beneath her feet. Suddenly, the spell was broken. The creatures turned and melted back into the forest, leaving Emma alone in the clearing. She didn't know if she had passed some kind of test or if they had simply lost interest, but she seized the opportunity to run. Branches whipped at her face and roots threatened to trip her with every step, but she pushed on, driven by a primal fear that drowned out all rational thought. Behind her, she could still hear the creatures moving, their calls growing fainter as she put distance between them. But even as she escaped, Emma knew the forest was still watching, and that whatever had happened in that clearing was only the beginning of a mystery that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The breakthrough that would save Emma's life came when she stumbled into an area where her cell phone unexpectedly picked up a weak signal, allowing her to place a frantic call to emergency services while still running from her pursuers. The 911 recording captured her panicked description of being chased by creatures that defied rational explanation, beings that moved through the forest with intelligence and coordination that suggested advanced cognitive abilities. Her call was interrupted by sounds that the emergency operator later described as unlike anything in their experience. Vocalizations that seemed to come from multiple sources and carried an unmistakable sense of intelligence and purpose. The creatures seemed to realize what she was doing and began calling to each other with increased urgency, as if debating whether to stop her communication or allow it to continue. Emma's call ended abruptly when her phone lost signal, but not before emergency responders had obtained her GPS coordinates and a recording that would become the subject of intense analysis and debate. The creatures pursuing her seemed to realize that outside help was coming, and their vocalizations took on a different quality, less playful and more urgent, as if they were debating whether to continue their pursuit or retreat deeper into the forest. Emma could hear them calling to each other in what sounded like rapid consultation, their massive forms still crashing through the trees behind her, but with less coordination than before. The change in their behavior suggested that they understood the implications of human authorities becoming involved in their activities. The sound of approaching helicopters seemed to trigger a fundamental change in the creatures' behavior, their pursuit becoming less aggressive as they apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. Emma could still hear them moving through the forest around her, but they were no longer actively hurting her or trying to cut off her escape routes. Instead, they seemed to be withdrawing deeper into the wilderness, their vocalizations fading as they put distance between themselves and the approaching rescue operation. Emma's relief was tempered by the realization that her ordeal was far from over. She was still lost in a vast wilderness with creatures that could return at any moment if they decided the threat had passed. The creatures' withdrawal was not immediate or complete, as Emma continued to hear them moving through the forest around her for several more hours. They seemed to be maintaining surveillance of her position while staying far enough away to avoid detection by the search teams. Their vocalizations became more subdued but never stopped entirely, suggesting that they were continuing to communicate about her presence and the arrival of outside help. Emma had the disturbing realization that she was still being watched and evaluated, even as rescue teams worked to locate her position. The creature's ability to remain hidden while maintaining awareness of the situation demonstrated a level of tactical sophistication that was deeply unsettling. As the search helicopters grew closer, Emma began to notice changes in the forest around her that suggested the creatures were actively working to conceal evidence of their presence. Footprints that had been clearly visible just hours before seemed to be disappearing, as if someone was deliberately obscuring the tracks. Equipment that had been scattered during her flight was being moved or hidden, and the paths through the forest that had seemed so clear during the chase were becoming increasingly difficult to follow. The creatures appeared to be conducting a systematic cleanup operation, removing any evidence that might confirm Emma's incredible story about what had happened in the wilderness. The search and rescue operation that followed Emma's emergency call revealed evidence that supported her incredible claims while raising new questions about what had actually occurred in those remote mountains. Rangers found massive footprints throughout the area where Emma had been chased, tracks that formed complex patterns suggesting coordinated movement by multiple large beings. Her camera equipment was discovered scattered throughout the forest, positioned in ways that suggested deliberate placement rather than random dropping, with memory cards that contained hours of footage showing glimpses of enormous figures moving through the trees with obvious intelligence and purpose. The equipment had been handled with care, as if the creatures understood its value and had deliberately preserved it for discovery. The footage recovered from Emma's cameras provided the most compelling evidence ever captured of intelligent non-human life in North American forests, showing clear images of bipedal creatures that stood over 8 feet tall and moved with coordination that indicated advanced cognitive abilities. The beings appeared to be deliberately positioning themselves to be recorded, as if they wanted their existence to be documented, but only under circumstances of their own choosing. Most remarkably, some sequences showed the creatures using what appeared to be primitive tools and communicating with each other through complex vocalizations that suggested a sophisticated language system. The footage also captured moments where the creatures seemed to be studying Emma's equipment with obvious scientific interest, manipulating her devices with a dexterity that suggested hands capable of fine motor control. Analysis of the recovered footage revealed details that investigators found deeply unsettling, particularly the way the creatures seemed to be conducting their own documentation of Emma's behavior and responses. Several sequences showed the beings using what appeared to be primitive recording devices of their own, crude but functional tools that suggested they were gathering their own evidence of the encounter for purposes that remained completely mysterious. The creatures' behavior indicated not just intelligence, but also scientific curiosity, as if they were conducting their own research project with Emma as the unwilling subject. Most disturbing was the discovery that some of the footage had been edited or altered in ways that suggested the creatures possessed technical knowledge that exceeded what should have been possible for beings living in the wilderness. Emma was found 12 hours after her emergency call, discovered by search teams following the trail of broken vegetation and scattered equipment that marked her desperate flight through the forest. She was dehydrated and exhausted, but physically unharmed, though her mental state suggested she had experienced trauma that went far beyond simple fear of wild animals. Her account of being chased by multiple intelligent creatures was initially met with skepticism, but the physical evidence and recorded footage forced investigators to take her claims seriously. Most puzzling was her insistence that the creatures had deliberately allowed her to escape once they realized that outside help was coming, suggesting that their intelligence extended to understanding the broader implications of their actions. The evidence left behind after Emma's escape, strange tool marks, massive coordinated footprints, and her haunting footage, forced even the most skeptical rangers to admit she had encountered something far beyond a wild animal. The area was quietly restricted, and rumors spread of a hidden society in the forest. But Emma's story remained the only first-hand account. Her experience stands as a chilling warning. Some mysteries in the wild are not meant to be solved, and the silence of the forest may be watching, waiting for the next intruder. It was March 11, 2024, deep in the wet silence of Washington's Olympic National Forest, where fog settles low and radio signals vanish within minutes of the road. That morning, a motion sensor blinked to life. Hours later, a new video appeared online. What it showed would soon divide everyone who watched it. The clip lasted 18 seconds. At first, it showed only static night vision grain, the faint hiss of wind, and a campfire's reflected glow across a plastic tarp. Then, from beyond the creek, a broad, upright shape crossed the frame. Its movements were slow and deliberate, partially obscured by drifting fog, before it turned and disappeared behind a ridge. A heartbeat later, the recording cut to black. Initial reactions were muted, but re-uploads began spreading across Reddit and YouTube within hours. A pattern soon formed in how people labeled the reposts, each one hinting at survival and encounter, rather than simple observation. By the next evening, thousands had watched the clip, yet Ellison himself could not be reached. The silence where his voice should have been grew louder with each unanswered call. Mark Ellison, 50, was a former fire tower ranger who spent 2 decades across the Olympic Peninsula. Known for his precision, he logged every route and weather shift, except, perhaps, the one that mattered most. He lived alone near Forks, where the forest pressed close to his property. After leaving his post, he ran a small channel focused on camping safety and wildlife behavior, field notes more than entertainment. He ignored the folklore around him, documenting only what could be measured. The device he used on his final trip was a compact infrared trail camera that automatically sent every recording to off-site storage. Early March 2024 brought steady rain to the upper Sol Duc drainage. Rain carried the smell of iron from wet bark. Mark Ellison had planned a 3-day trip to test a hybrid solar battery trail camera under dense canopy. He drove from his home in Forks and parked off Highway 101 near Fairholme before hiking in on foot. His plan was simple: set 2 cameras at separate clearings, then return once the data uploaded. Each note he recorded felt routine, until it didn't. GPS tracker and voice recordings showed a routine trip. He checked in at precise intervals, 3:12 p.m., noting barometric pressure, 5:40 p.m., mentioning drizzle. He reached camp before sunset, near a tributary of the Sol Duc River. On day 2, he moved between camera sites, covering nearly 5 miles before returning to camp by late afternoon. His last coordinates placed him a quarter mile from his tent. At 7:52 that evening, Ellison sent a voice note about rising wind and plans to leave early. The message uploaded, then the connection dropped. No further transmissions came after 8 p.m. At 8:41 p.m., his trail camera detected motion. It recorded 18 seconds of night vision footage before uploading to the cloud, the same clip showing a tall shape near the riverbank. Despite the valley's notoriously weak service, short bursts of connection often occurred along ridgelines, which could explain how the file transmitted successfully. Yet the file was perfect, too perfect. The successful upload confirmed equipment was functioning, yet nothing followed. The cameras stayed silent through the night. If the camera was alive, something else in the valley was too. When Ellison failed to return, his sister reported him overdue on March 14th. She had assumed he'd extended the trip because of persistent rain and poor road conditions, but after several unanswered messages, she contacted authorities. Search teams later found his vehicle locked at the trailhead. Teams advanced along the drainage using standard search grids. Near his camp, they found the tent intact, sleeping bag rolled, and cooking gear neatly stacked. His backpack rested under the tarp with 1 day's rations left. The radio was powered off, its batteries removed. Only his phone was missing. The charger remained coiled beside a full battery pack, suggesting he'd taken it with him before vanishing into the forest. A recovered set of boot impressions led away from camp for roughly 40 yards before blending into a patch of wet moss where tracking became unreliable. The path ran parallel to the stream in the same direction as the camera's recorded footage. Was he following something or being led? Searchers found no signs of struggle, no animal traces, and no evidence of sudden runoff or slope collapse. Technicians found Ellison's GPS trail ended abruptly at 8:02 p.m., less than 40 minutes before his camera recorded motion. Investigators blamed either drained batteries or a signal drop in rough terrain. His smartwatch kept transmitting 40 minutes longer, logging movement after the tracker went dark. 2 devices, 2 endpoints, no clear link. The footage drew attention only after his family shared his details online, connecting his name to the viral clip. Search teams expanded their radius but found nothing new. Rain erased traces. Only his gear and a field notebook remained. The last entry dated March 3rd, stopping mid-sentence, pen lifted mid-stroke. Frame-by-frame playback revealed more detail. The object's outline extended nearly 7 feet above ground level when scaled against visible branches. The infrared exposure, usually harsh on warm objects, registered the figure several degrees cooler than its surroundings. That single anomaly became the focus of countless breakdowns. Under normal conditions, a living subject moving through cold air would appear warmer on infrared. The inverse pattern suggested heavy insulation, either natural or layered, capable of masking body heat. But what kind of insulation makes something colder than the forest itself? Colorized conversions circulated across multiple forums, each exaggerating contrast in different ways. One enhanced frame showed a faint reflection on the lower left, 2 consecutive frames in which a smaller irregular shape appeared. Some called it a sensor echo or a lens reflection from fog droplets, while others saw the hint of another crouched figure. No one could agree on the scale, and no one could explain why it moved when nothing else did. Professionals with backgrounds in drone and wildlife imaging weighed in. A group of remote sensing students from Oregon State University attempted to reconstruct the camera's parameters based on the embedded EXIF metadata. Coordinates placed the scene on the south side of the Salt Duke River, roughly 2 miles from the nearest service road. Temperature metadata suggested ambient conditions near 43 degrees Fahrenheit, consistent with Ellison's earlier logs. The camera angle matched one of the test positions Ellison had described to fellow hobbyists weeks earlier. In a comment preserved through cached archives, he mentioned a spot overlooking a narrow stream bend with enough open ground to track deer movement. That detail aligned with the topography visible in the clip, a sloping bank descending into a shallow channel bordered by alder and cedar. He'd mapped it himself. He'd walked that ground before. So why did it look different through the lens? What puzzled analysts was the clean upload timestamp. The file's creation and transfer times showed no signs of delay or corruption. If the device had malfunctioned or been damaged, the upload would have stalled or produced a partial file. Instead, the connection remained steady for the full duration, meaning the camera completed its data queue without interruption. Perfect transmission from a valley known for dead zones. Technicians studying the pixel patterns noticed a faint flicker in the upper right quadrant between frames 241 and 245, less than a quarter of a second in real time. When brightness levels were equalized, a diffused light signature appeared, consistent with a brief reflection from a wet surface or metallic object. It moved counter to the camera's natural light gradient, suggesting an independent source of reflection rather than random interference. Something had caught light where no light should have been. Theories diverged. One camp claimed it was a visual echo from the moving figure. Another insisted it was the partial outline of a second body entering the periphery. A third argued for atmospheric distortion common in humid forest air when illuminated by infrared. No theory could fully explain why the reflected area appeared cooler than both background and subject, reversing expected thermal hierarchy. Independent field photographers recreated similar setups using identical hardware. Most achieved plausible silhouettes using heavy clothing or insulated suits, yet none could replicate the precise temperature inversion shown in the file. The simulated subjects always registered warmer than the forest floor, even when soaked or coated with mud. To match the readings, an object would need either a heat-reflective surface or extremely low core temperature inconsistent with a living human, or it would need to have been there so long it had become part of the cold itself. Satellite imagery confirmed that the area around the recorded coordinates contained deep canopy and water channels known for producing cold air pockets. In such zones, temperature gradients could shift abruptly over short distances. Analysts tried mapping air density changes to explain the flickering outlines, yet the footage's stability argued against wind interference. Every tree in the frame held still. Only the moving figure showed motion distortion, as if everything else knew to stay frozen. As online interest grew, various users claimed to possess clearer copies. Most were filtered versions of the same source, compressed and re-uploaded under misleading titles. The original remained on a cloud server associated with Ellison's account until it was mirrored by multiple websites. A retired wildlife biologist from the Pacific Northwest Research Station reviewed the clip at normal speed and noted proportion ratios unusual for any known animal. The limb length appeared human, but the forward pitch of the torso and restricted arm swing suggested limited shoulder rotation, a trait found in large quadrupeds when forced upright. Combined with the even pacing and apparent mass, the profile did not match typical human gait. It walked like something learning how. Forums filled with motion-tracking overlays. Volunteers marked joint points and stride intervals. The results varied, but shared one oddity. The stride distance measured consistently longer than that of an average adult male. The figure's head never turned toward the camera, despite the obvious illumination shift when it crossed the clearing. It moved as if aware of the light source, but indifferent to it, or as if it had done this before. A few users highlighted the final 3 frames where the shape began to descend behind a slope. The camera registered a brief drop in ambient contrast, followed by a pulse of interference resembling static. Some mistook it for a system error, but file diagnostics confirmed intentional cutoff. The device terminated recording precisely at the standard 18-second mark, meaning the motion trigger had completed its cycle rather than failed. It ended exactly when it was supposed to. Nothing malfunctioned, nothing broke. It simply stopped watching. When investigators later cross-checked the metadata with official survey maps, the coordinates aligned with a ridge overlooking a narrow tributary of the Sol Duc River. The distance to the nearest access point measured just over 2 miles, accessible only by foot and far from campsites. Despite meticulous analysis, no consensus emerged. To some, the video showed a hoax performed with precision equipment. To others, it was a rare example of an unknown presence moving through one of the most isolated valleys in the region. The only certainty came from the data itself. The camera functioned exactly as designed, recorded at stable temperature and time, and transmitted the file without error. But certainty isn't the same as truth. By the second week after the leak, breakdown threads dominated discussion boards. Digital forensics groups produced papers describing possible causes, ranging from double exposure to sensor misread. Yet each hypothesis left one constant unexplained: the secondary reflection that appeared in those 2 brief frames. It was there, unmistakable, yet no one could say what it was or why it moved opposite the main subject. Some things defy focus no matter how many times you replay them. When search teams reached the coordinates tied to the footage, the clearing matched every contour visible in the clip: the slope, the stream bend, even the distinctive split trunk on the left side of the frame, all present. But the primary trail camera that had recorded the event was gone. Only its nylon mounting strap and a length of solar wire remained, both ends frayed but not cut. The ground beneath the tree showed no signs of struggle, only a compressed patch of soil where the camera housing should have rested. Something had taken it gently. 200 yards from the site, Ellison's backup camera remained active. It captured no visuals, only 8 seconds of heavy impacts, a low hum, then static at 8:42 p.m., 1 minute after the main clip. Analysts noted an electromagnetic-type spike, as if something nearby generated interference. His vehicle sat untouched at the Fairholme trailhead, keys gone but supplies intact. Hours after the footage spread, forensic users discovered a second save at 9:03 p.m., over 20 minutes after all devices went dark. Service in the valley was poor, yet deliberate access was clear. The file had been reopened. The question was, by whom? This discrepancy became the first tangible contradiction in the case. If Ellison had left camp before 8 p.m. and the footage auto-uploaded at 8:41, who interacted with the file at 9:03? Investigators tested the hypothesis of an automated server sync, but logs from the manufacturer's database showed no queued retrieves or firmware updates at that time. Whatever process modified the file had occurred locally, not through routine background operations. Further inspection revealed that the 9:03 record shared the same checksum as the original, ruling out content alteration. The change involved metadata only, consistent with a resave command triggered when a user previews or reopens the file, as if someone had been reviewing what they just recorded. That small gap, 22 minutes between upload and modification, became the focal point for both official investigators and online sleuths. Some analysts noted that minor server clock drift or timestamp desynchronization could technically account for the discrepancy, though the lack of corresponding network activity kept the anomaly under scrutiny. Searchers on the ground had found no footprints beyond the creek, no equipment suggesting Ellison retrieved the camera himself, and no evidence of wildlife interference capable of pressing buttons or powering devices. Yet the file's behavior implied human interaction, or something that understood how humans interact. Forums began speculating that someone else had been in the area, possibly another hiker or a passerby who found the camera and triggered a manual upload while checking its contents. But weather records showed heavy rain moving through the region that night, reducing visibility and making travel off established routes unlikely. Rangers also confirmed no other camping permits had been issued within a 5-mile radius during that period. No one else should have been there. So who touched the camera at 9:03? 3 nights after the original clip spread, a second version surfaced on a small video mirror under an unverified account. The username matched none of Ellison's, yet the description claimed it was a restored copy from the trail camera's SD card. Uploaded just after midnight on March 14th, between official searches and the final volunteer sweep, it seemed deliberately timed. The checksum differed slightly, indicating a new encode. This version ran 5 seconds longer. Amid static and interference, a faint shape appeared, elongated, bent, dragging something downslope. The feed ended in a smear of noise and blackout. 5 seconds that changed everything. Video forensic groups analyzed the new clip and found no edits. Only breaks typical of an interrupted upload resumed under weak signal. The file acted as if a frozen transfer had later continued from cached data, suggesting the added segment always existed but failed to send the first time. The camera had seen more than anyone realized. Its block-based system could store incomplete frames for later upload, yet no one could explain how those missing packets resurfaced 3 days later, or who held the physical card needed to retrieve them. By then, search teams had confirmed one fact: the primary camera was gone. Compression analysis deepened the puzzle. The static at the start of the added sequence displayed a symmetrical frequency band, evidence of re-encoding, not external noise. Experts described it as a signature left when damaged frames are rebuilt by automated correction software. The recovered images were cleaner than they should have been, almost too intact for a device that had supposedly gone offline. Someone had worked to restore them. But why? Viewers who enhanced the footage noticed a series of faint flickers along the right edge, forming a repeating pattern consistent with a swinging light source. When motion tracked, the rhythm aligned closely with a bipedal gait, alternating at just under 2 strides per second. The dragging form appeared attached or pulled, its heat signature fading unevenly as the larger shape moved downslope. Something was being carried or taken. Timing comparisons soon connected the recovered segment to another dataset, Ellison's smartwatch telemetry extracted from cloud backup. His device had been configured to sync periodically through a low-bandwidth satellite relay, preserving minute-level heart rate logs even after local signal loss. The data showed a sudden elevation at 8:44 p.m., climbing rapidly for less than 2 minutes before flatlining at 8:46. The moment of peak signal loss overlapped exactly with the extended portion of the new video. His heart had stopped at the exact moment the extra footage ended. To investigators, the correlation was circumstantial, but for online researchers, it became a turning point. The idea that the extra footage aligned with Ellison's last recorded heartbeat implied both events were captured within the same minute. The footage didn't just show what happened, it showed when he stopped running. Within 24 hours of its posting, the second file was removed from the original site for privacy concerns, but duplicates spread immediately across mirror channels. Each re-upload introduced new compression errors, yet the defining sequence, the faint figure dragging weight behind the ridge, remained visible enough to sustain argument. Whether it depicted corrupted pixels or something tangible, its timing and method of appearance transformed the case from an isolated disappearance into a digital mystery. The recovery team moved through the Sol Duke drainage with handheld thermal scanners, mapping every contour of the floodplain. On the sixth day, near a narrowing of the creek, they found an object half buried in mud beneath a fallen branch. It was Ellison's smartwatch, screen cracked, band torn, but GPS module intact. Data extracted from the watch showed a sudden burst of motion beginning at 8:43 p.m., with his heart rate spiking at 8:44 as he covered roughly 200 feet in under a minute before signals stopped. The elevation graph indicated a brief incline, then descent toward the water. Analysts estimated that he had covered the distance in less than 40 seconds before the signal flatlined. 40 seconds of speed, then nothing. Around the same area, investigators documented two sets of impressions in the soft soil. One matched standard hiking boots consistent with Ellison's model, size 11. The other appeared parallel, larger, broader, and bare. The second track measured nearly 14 inches from heel to toe, but the shape was uneven, with pressure points unlike a human arch. The prints extended for 3 paces before fading where the mud thinned near gravel. Wildlife biologists from the Department of Fish and Wildlife later examined plaster casts and noted that a bear could produce similar depth under rearing posture. But the stride length, over 5 feet, did not match known locomotion patterns. Biologists noted that while bears can rear briefly, sustained pacing at that stride length was improbable. The impressions showed neither a full quadrupedal gait nor a consistent upright stance, but something intermediate, something that walked beside him, matching him step for step. Despite growing speculation, law enforcement issued no public statements. Search logs made no mention of recovering the missing SD card. Officially, the investigation categorized all unrecovered equipment as having undetermined disposition. By mid-March, the internet divided into factions. One group advanced what they called the human theory, the belief that Ellison's disappearance resulted from a staged scare gone wrong. They argued that another camper or filmmaker had planned a viral prank, misjudged conditions, and triggered a real emergency. But if it was staged, why did the footprints continue past the frame? Opposing them were proponents of the biological theory who treated the event as an authentic encounter with an unidentified species. They cited the temperature inversions in the original file and the stride spacing at the creek as evidence of a large biped adapted for stealth in cold environments. And no one could say who moved the file at 9:03. A third camp, labeled by moderators as the staged upload theory, took a different approach. They suggested that Ellison himself had captured legitimate wildlife footage, but someone else later manipulated or recontextualized it. The 9:03 p.m. modification, they claimed, marked an external actor accessing his account after the fact. These competing narratives generated a wave of open-source data projects. One group of independent analysts pulled IP logs from mirror archives and discovered an address embedded in the header of the second upload. The IP traced not to Washington, but to a satellite modem registered in Idaho. When cross-referenced with commercial leasing databases, the modem's serial number appeared in a rental invoice issued to a forestry contractor operating in Olympic National Forest earlier that year. The company had returned the unit in January, weeks before Ellison's trip, a recycled connection from equipment that shouldn't have been active. But it was. That discovery reignited claims that someone with professional field access had handled the footage after his disappearance. Digital forensics experts reviewing the trail camera's communication protocol agreed that a remote connection could have initiated upload from any device paired to its cloud credentials. It was plausible, though improbable, that a technician testing residual logins from a recycled modem could have triggered a resync without knowing its content. Or someone knew exactly what they were looking for. While online debates deepened, a new development surfaced in late March. A regional newspaper received an anonymous message from someone claiming to possess unlisted footage from the same night. The sender described being a drone hobbyist testing night sensors several miles south of the Salt Duke drainage. Attached metadata placed the flight path within overlapping airspace at 8:44 p.m., 2 minutes before Ellison's smartwatch signal ended. When the outlet viewed the clip, it showed a faint thermal flare above the canopy, followed by a sudden cold patch moving diagonally through the frame. At 8:44, a new light cut across the canopy. Not bright, cold. There were no visible lights or reflective markers, no indication of human presence. Analysts who later examined screenshots described the object as elongated and vertical, emitting less heat than its surroundings, as if covered in moisture or dense material. A shape moved against the gradient, vertical, silent. The drone's coordinates intersected within roughly 150 feet of Ellison's final smartwatch GPS ping, accounting for expected GPS drift under dense canopy. Within a day of publication, the file vanished. The hosting site replaced the link with a message stating it had been removed for privacy violation. Attempts to verify ownership failed. The account used to upload the footage was deleted, and the original drone operator never came forward. The newspaper printed a brief correction stating that they could not confirm the clip's authenticity. Still, enough viewers had archived it to maintain discussion. The alignment of timestamps, trail camera at 8:41, drone at 8:44, smartwatch at 8:46, formed a triangular chronology that no one could dismiss. 3 devices, 3 timestamps, and nothing after. By early April, official search efforts concluded. Reports described weather degradation, reduced visibility, and low likelihood of recovery. Official reports later summarized 3 confirmed data points, each drawn from separate devices. The trail camera upload at 8:41 p.m., the smartwatch cessation at 8:46 p.m., and the drone telemetry anomaly logged at 8:44 p.m. Beyond those times, every trace ended. There were no confirmed sightings, no physical remains, and no identified suspects. Just silence where a man used to be. When spring arrived, the online focus shifted from search coordination to retrospective analysis. A few persistent archivists built composite maps linking every timestamp and coordinate into an interactive model. The overlap revealed a convergence zone less than 2 acres wide, dense forest floor bordered by drainage slopes, where line of sight dropped abruptly. It was the same valley Ellison had documented years earlier while mapping fire breaks. He'd walked that ground 100 times. But had something else been walking it longer? In June, another anomaly drew attention. Users tracking residual logins to Ellison's accounts noted new activity. Someone had accessed his long-abandoned video page from a masked IP routed through Oregon. The login session lasted less than 10 minutes, but resulted in deletion of all previous uploads except one titled Night Vision Test Number 2. Its upload timestamp predated the disappearance by exactly 2 minutes. Why leave only that one? The surviving clip, less than 10 seconds long, depicted a simple setup, Ellison adjusting the trail camera while testing focus. In the final frame, his reflection appeared faintly on the lens housing. Behind him, deeper in the trees, a dim outline curved across the periphery, slightly delayed in movement, as though the reflection and the object behind it were out of sync. The detail went unnoticed for months, until frame-stabilized copies circulated through forums. When slowed, the offset became clearer. Ellison's arm lowered first, but the faint silhouette of the same motion lingered a half-beat longer before fading, as if something had been learning how to mirror him and hadn't quite perfected the timing. Investigators declined to comment on the reactivation of his account. The provider confirmed only that the deletion and upload records were genuine and originated from correct credentials. Forensic analysts couldn't determine whether the login came from recovered hardware or a reused credential on another machine, leaving the source of access unresolved. Someone still had his passwords. Someone was still watching his work. By July, the case was formally suspended. The forest had taken everything back. Only the footage remained, clear, silent, watching. The three remaining points, the camera, drone, and watch, formed the last measurable chain in a story without closure. Local news moved on, and Moss reclaimed the search site. Online, only fragments survived, mirrored clips, conflicting diagrams, fading threads of speculation. The last trace of Mark Ellison came from a device built to record what passed before it, not what lingered behind. Everything after that was interpretation, pixels, reflections, and data gaps where a person should have been. Maybe something else had been watching him. On October 22, 2023, 43-year-old David Kellerman, a former military intelligence officer turned private investigator, stumbled upon what would become the most controversial piece of evidence in cryptozoology history. What started as a routine surveillance job in the remote forests of Northern California would lead to the discovery of footage so compelling and disturbing that government agencies would spend months trying to suppress its release. David Kellerman had built his reputation on finding things that others couldn't or wouldn't. After 15 years in military intelligence, specializing in reconnaissance and surveillance operations, he had transitioned to private investigation work that often took him to places most people would never dare to venture. During his service, David had developed skills that few civilians possessed. He could move through any terrain without leaving traces, set up surveillance equipment that would remain undetected for months, and analyze behavioral patterns with an accuracy that had made him legendary among his peers. The case that brought David to the Humboldt County wilderness seemed straightforward enough. Margaret Thornfield, an elderly widow from San Francisco, had hired him to investigate the disappearance of her grandson, 22-year-old Timothy Thornfield, who had vanished during a solo camping trip 6 months earlier. The official search had been called off after 3 weeks, with authorities concluding that Timothy had likely fallen victim to harsh wilderness conditions. But Margaret wasn't satisfied with the official explanation. Timothy had been an experienced outdoorsman and Eagle Scout who knew the forests of Northern California better than most park rangers. She was convinced that something else had happened to her grandson. The official investigation had been thorough, but ultimately fruitless. Search and rescue teams had combed hundreds of square miles of forest using helicopters, tracking dogs, and thermal imaging equipment. They had found Timothy's abandoned campsite relatively quickly, but the scene had raised more questions than answers. His tent was still standing, his food supplies were untouched, and his expensive camera equipment was scattered around the site as if he had left in a hurry. David's investigation had led him deep into the Six Rivers National Forest, following Timothy's planned route through some of the most remote terrain in California. His methodical approach had already uncovered several clues that suggested Timothy's disappearance was far from ordinary. Strange footprints around the abandoned campsite, unusual hair samples caught on tree branches, and several damaged trees that showed signs of being deliberately broken. The footprints were unlike anything David had encountered. They measured approximately 16 inches in length and 8 inches in width, with a depth that suggested something weighing at least 400 pounds. The stride pattern indicated bipedal movement, but the gait was different from human locomotion. It was on his fourth day in the forest that David made the discovery that would change everything. While investigating a remote valley about 2 miles from Timothy's last known location, David's motion-activated trail cameras had captured something extraordinary during the previous night. The footage showed a massive, bipedal creature moving through the forest with purposeful intelligence, carrying what appeared to be human belongings. David's military training had taught him to remain calm under pressure, but reviewing the footage on his camera's LCD screen made his hands shake with excitement and disbelief. The creature was unlike anything he had seen in his years of wilderness operations around the world. Standing at least 8 feet tall and covered in dark, coarse hair, it moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. The creature's movement patterns were particularly fascinating to David's trained eye. It demonstrated an understanding of forest navigation that surpassed even the most experienced human woodsman. The being moved along natural corridors through the dense vegetation, avoiding areas where its passage would leave obvious signs, and seemed to understand how to use terrain features to remain concealed from potential observers. More disturbing was what the creature was carrying. David could clearly make out a backpack, camping gear, and what looked like camera equipment, items that matched the description of Timothy Thornfield's missing belongings. The implications were staggering. Not only had David potentially captured the first clear footage of a Bigfoot, but the creature appeared to be connected to Timothy's disappearance. David's investigation took on new urgency as he realized he might be dealing with something far more significant than a simple missing person case. He began setting up additional cameras throughout the valley, creating a surveillance network that would monitor the creature's movements and hopefully lead him to answers about Timothy's fate. The surveillance network David established was based on techniques he had learned during counterinsurgency operations in Afghanistan. He positioned cameras at natural choke points where any large creature would be forced to pass, used camouflaged solar panels to ensure continuous power, and established overlapping fields of view that would make it impossible for anything to move through the area undetected. The breakthrough came on his 6th night in the forest. David's cameras captured not just one creature, but an entire family group, adults and what appeared to be juveniles, moving through the valley in a coordinated pattern. The footage revealed behavior that was unmistakably intelligent. The creatures communicated through complex vocalizations, used tools to manipulate their environment, and demonstrated problem-solving abilities that challenged everything science thought it knew about unknown primates. The family group consisted of what appeared to be 2 adult males, 3 adult females, and 4 juveniles of varying ages. Their social interactions were remarkably sophisticated, with clear hierarchies and role assignments. The larger male seemed to serve as a scout, moving ahead of the group to assess potential threats or obstacles. The females appeared to be responsible for the care and education of the juveniles, while the second male brought up the rear, ensuring the group's security. Most remarkably, the cameras captured the creatures interacting with human artifacts in ways that suggested they understood their purpose and origin. They examined Timothy's camping equipment with obvious curiosity, handled his camera gear with surprising gentleness, and even appeared to be attempting to operate some of the electronic devices. David realized he was documenting something unprecedented. Not just evidence of Bigfoot's existence, but proof that these creatures possessed intelligence and curiosity about human technology. The footage showed them living in sophisticated shelters constructed from natural materials, using primitive tools and maintaining what appeared to be a complex social structure. The shelters were particularly impressive, demonstrating engineering principles that rivaled human construction techniques. The creatures had woven branches and vegetation into waterproof structures that provided protection from the elements while remaining virtually invisible to casual observation. The interiors were organized with designated areas for sleeping, food storage, and what appeared to be tool-making activities. But the most shocking discovery came when David's cameras captured footage of Timothy Thornfield himself, alive, apparently unharmed, and living among the creatures. The young man appeared to have been adopted into their group, participating in their daily activities and showing no signs of distress or captivity. The footage suggested that rather than being a victim, Timothy had become an observer and perhaps even a student of these remarkable beings. The implications of this discovery were staggering. Timothy appeared to have been living with the creatures for months, learning their behaviors and possibly even their communication methods. In several clips, David observed Timothy participating in what appeared to be teaching sessions where the adult creatures demonstrated various survival techniques and forest navigation skills. The young man seemed to have adapted remarkably well to his new environment, showing none of the psychological trauma typically associated with prolonged captivity or isolation. Timothy's integration into the group was so complete that he had begun to adopt some of their behavioral patterns. He moved through the forest with the same silent grace as his adoptive family, communicated through a combination of gestures and vocalizations that the creatures seemed to understand, and participated in their daily routines of foraging, shelter maintenance, and group activities. David's analysis of the footage revealed even more disturbing details. The creatures appeared to have a sophisticated understanding of human technology and behavior. They had carefully preserved Timothy's electronic equipment, keeping it dry and protected in what appeared to be a specially constructed shelter. More remarkably, they seemed to understand the purpose of the cameras and recording devices, occasionally positioning them to capture specific activities or interactions. The social dynamics within the creature group were complex and fascinating. David observed clear hierarchies with older individuals teaching younger ones and specific roles assigned to different members of the community. They demonstrated advanced problem-solving abilities, working together to construct elaborate shelters, create tools from natural materials, and even develop what appeared to be a primitive form of agriculture, cultivating certain plants and fungi in designated areas of their territory. The creatures' tool use was particularly sophisticated. They fashioned implements from stone, wood, and bone that served specific purposes. Digging tools for extracting roots and tubers, cutting implements for processing plant materials, and even what appeared to be primitive weapons for hunting small game. The tools showed evidence of careful craftsmanship and were maintained and improved over time. David's military instincts told him that this discovery was too significant to handle alone. The footage he had captured would revolutionize our understanding of human evolution, primate intelligence, and the hidden ecosystems that still existed in North America's most remote wilderness areas. But he also understood that such evidence would attract attention from government agencies that might not have the public's best interests at heart. His concerns proved justified when David returned to civilization and attempted to contact Timothy's grandmother with news of his discovery. Within hours of uploading the footage to a secure server, David found himself under surveillance by unmarked vehicles and receiving visits from individuals who claimed to represent various federal agencies but carried credentials that didn't quite check out. The first visit came at 6:30 a.m., just 2 days after David had returned from the forest. 3 individuals in dark suits appeared at his office, claiming to represent a joint task force investigating unusual wildlife activity in national forests. Their leader, who identified himself only as Agent Morrison, was polite but firm in his questioning about David's activities in the Six Rivers National Forest. The visitors were professional and polite, but their message was clear. David had stumbled upon something that was considered a matter of national security. They explained that the existence of these creatures had been known to certain government agencies for decades, and that a careful protocol had been established to manage any interactions or discoveries. David's footage, they claimed, could disrupt delicate research programs and potentially endanger both the creatures and any humans who might encounter them. Agent Morrison revealed that the government had been aware of these creature populations since the 1960s, when military personnel conducting training exercises in remote wilderness areas began reporting encounters with unknown bipedal primates. Initial investigations had been conducted under the auspices of various classified programs, with findings that were deemed too sensitive for public release. The pressure to surrender his evidence intensified rapidly. David received offers to purchase his footage for substantial sums, followed by increasingly aggressive demands that he turn over all materials related to his investigation. When he refused, the harassment escalated to include break-ins at his office, tampering with his vehicle, and threats against his personal safety. The offers were substantial, initially starting at $500,000 for all footage and related materials, then escalating to over $2 million when David continued to refuse. The money was offered through intermediaries who claimed to represent private research foundations, but David's intelligence background allowed him to recognize the hallmarks of government-front organizations. David realized he was caught in a situation that went far beyond a simple missing person case. The government's reaction to his discovery suggested that authorities were already aware of these creatures' existence and were actively working to suppress any evidence that might reach the public. The implications were staggering. If Bigfoot was real and the government knew about it, how many other secrets were being kept from the American people? The harassment campaign against David was sophisticated and relentless. His phone calls were monitored, his internet activity was tracked, and his financial accounts were subjected to mysterious audits and freezes. Former military colleagues who had maintained contact with him suddenly became unavailable, and his professional network began to distance themselves from his work. The message was clear: cooperate with the suppression effort or face complete professional and personal destruction. David's bank accounts were frozen under the pretense of a tax investigation. His professional licenses were challenged by regulatory agencies citing anonymous complaints. And his landlord received visits from individuals claiming to be conducting background checks for security clearances. The psychological pressure was intense and unrelenting, designed to isolate him from support systems and make resistance seem futile. But David's military training had prepared him for psychological warfare, and he refused to be intimidated. Instead, he began documenting the harassment he was experiencing, creating a parallel record of government suppression that was almost as compelling as his original Bigfoot footage. The pattern of intimidation and cover-up suggested that these creatures represented something far more significant than just an unknown species. They were evidence of a hidden world that powerful interests were determined to keep secret. Using skills learned during his military career, David began taking precautions to protect both himself and his evidence. He created multiple copies of his footage, stored them in secure locations, and established protocols for their release if anything happened to him. He also reached out to trusted contacts in the scientific community, sharing his findings with researchers who had the expertise to understand their significance. David's security protocols were based on techniques used to protect classified intelligence in hostile environments. He established dead drops in multiple locations, created encrypted digital copies stored on secure servers in different countries, and developed a network of trusted individuals who would release the information if he disappeared or was incapacitated. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a primatologist at UC Berkeley who had been quietly studying Bigfoot reports for over a decade, was among the first scientists to review David's footage. Her analysis confirmed what David had suspected. The creatures displayed behavioral patterns and physical characteristics that were consistent with a highly intelligent primate species that had somehow remained hidden from mainstream science. Dr. Rodriguez had been conducting her research in secret, knowing that open investigation of Bigfoot phenomena would destroy her academic career. She had accumulated a database of over 3,000 reported encounters, analyzed hundreds of footprint casts, and even collected hair and tissue samples that defied classification. David's footage provided the visual confirmation she had been seeking for years. The genetic analysis of hair samples that David had collected provided even more compelling evidence. The DNA showed characteristics that were clearly primate, but didn't match any known species in scientific databases. Most intriguingly, the genetic markers suggested a lineage that had diverged from human ancestors much more recently than previously thought possible. The DNA analysis revealed a genetic profile that was approximately 96% similar to modern humans, closer than chimpanzees or any other known primate species. The remaining 4% showed unique characteristics that suggested adaptation to specific environmental conditions and possibly enhanced physical capabilities. The genetic evidence supported the theory that these creatures represented a surviving branch of the human family tree. Dr. Rodriguez's preliminary findings indicated that these creatures might represent a surviving population of an archaic hominid species, possibly related to Homo erectus or an unknown branch of the human family tree. The implications for our understanding of human evolution were profound. If these beings had survived in North America for thousands of years, it would completely rewrite the story of human migration and development. The scientific analysis also revealed disturbing evidence of government knowledge and involvement. Several of the hair samples contained traces of synthetic compounds that suggested the creatures had been exposed to human-made chemicals, possibly through deliberate feeding or medical treatment. This evidence supported David's growing suspicion that government agencies had been studying and possibly managing these populations for decades. Chemical analysis revealed the presence of compounds used in veterinary tranquilizers, suggesting that the creatures had been captured and studied at some point. There were also traces of synthetic vitamins and minerals that indicated supplemental feeding programs. The evidence painted a picture of long-term government monitoring and management of these populations. As word of David's discovery began to spread through underground networks of researchers and cryptozoology enthusiasts, the pressure from government agencies intensified. David found himself the target of a sophisticated disinformation campaign designed to discredit his findings and destroy his reputation. False stories about his military service appeared online, his professional licenses were challenged by regulatory agencies, and former clients were contacted and pressured to file complaints against him. The disinformation campaign was remarkably thorough and well coordinated. Fake social media accounts began spreading rumors about David's mental health and professional competence. Doctored documents appeared online, suggesting he had been discharged from the military under questionable circumstances. Even his family members were contacted by individuals claiming to be journalists or researchers, asking leading questions designed to elicit statements that could be used to undermine his credibility. Professional trolls flooded online forums with posts questioning David's military record, his investigative methods, and his mental stability. Fake reviews appeared on professional rating sites, describing fictional negative experiences with his services. The campaign was so sophisticated that it clearly required significant resources and coordination, further confirming David's suspicions about government involvement. The situation reached a crisis point when David received credible intelligence that a raid on his secure storage facilities was being planned. Realizing that his evidence was in immediate danger, he made the decision to release everything to the public through multiple channels simultaneously. The footage was uploaded to dozens of video platforms, sent to news organizations around the world, and distributed through encrypted networks that would make it impossible to suppress completely. David's release strategy was carefully planned and executed with military precision. He coordinated the simultaneous release across multiple time zones, ensuring that the footage would be available on dozens of platforms before authorities could react. He also included detailed documentation of the harassment campaign against him, creating a narrative that explained why the evidence was being suppressed. The public release of David's footage created an immediate sensation. Within hours, the videos had been viewed millions of times and were being analyzed by experts around the world. The quality and consistency of the evidence made it impossible to dismiss as a hoax, and the documentation of government suppression efforts added credibility to claims that authorities had been hiding the truth about Bigfoot for decades. The initial response was overwhelming. Major news networks picked up the story within hours, and social media platforms were flooded with discussions, analyses, and debates about the footage. The hashtag Bigfoot Revealed began trending worldwide, and the videos were shared millions of times across all platforms. The scientific community's response was divided but intense. Mainstream researchers who had previously dismissed Bigfoot as pseudoscience were forced to confront evidence that met rigorous standards of documentation and analysis. The footage showed anatomical details, behavioral patterns, and environmental interactions that would be nearly impossible to fabricate convincingly. Leading primatologists from around the world began requesting access to the raw footage for analysis. Dr. Jane Goodall, the renowned chimpanzee researcher, issued a statement calling for serious scientific investigation of the evidence. The International Union for Conservation of Nature announced the formation of a special committee to evaluate the footage and its implications for primate taxonomy. Most compelling was the documentation of Timothy Thornfield's apparent integration into the creature's social group. Anthropologists noted that his behavior in the footage suggested he had learned to communicate with the beings and had been accepted as a member of their community. The implications for our understanding of interspecies communication and intelligence were profound. The international response to David's revelations was swift and varied. European scientists, less constrained by American government pressure, began organizing expeditions to search for similar creatures in their own wilderness areas. Indigenous communities around the world came forward with their own stories and evidence of encounters with similar beings, suggesting that these creatures might represent a global phenomenon rather than a uniquely North American mystery. The Smithsonian Institution announced plans for a comprehensive analysis of the footage, while the National Geographic Society committed funding for follow-up expeditions to the area where David had made his discoveries. International research teams from Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom requested permission to conduct their own investigations in American wilderness areas. The government's response to the footage's release was swift and predictable. Official statements dismissed the evidence as elaborate hoaxes, while behind the scenes, agencies worked to discredit David and suppress further investigation. The area where he had made his discoveries was suddenly declared off-limits due to environmental concerns, and researchers who attempted to verify his findings were turned away by armed guards. The Forest Service issued emergency closure orders for large sections of the Six Rivers National Forest, citing concerns about endangered species habitat and fire danger. Military personnel were deployed to enforce the closures, and aircraft were prohibited from flying over the restricted areas. The response was so disproportionate that it only served to validate David's claims about government cover-up efforts. But the damage to the cover-up had already been done. David's footage had provided the world with undeniable evidence that intelligent bipedal creatures were living in North America's wilderness areas, and that government agencies had been aware of their existence for years. The revelation sparked a global conversation about what other secrets might be hidden from public view, and whether citizens had the right to know about discoveries that could fundamentally change our understanding of life on Earth. Timothy Thornfield's fate remained a mystery, as attempts to return to the area where he had been filmed were blocked by federal authorities. His grandmother, Margaret, filed lawsuits demanding access to her grandson and answers about his condition, but legal proceedings were stalled by claims of national security and public safety concerns. The legal battle that followed revealed the extent of government knowledge about these creatures. Court documents, heavily redacted but still revealing, showed that multiple agencies had been aware of Bigfoot populations for decades. Research programs, funded through black budgets and classified operations, had been studying the creature's behavior, intelligence, and potential impact on human society. Margaret Thornfield's legal team, led by prominent civil rights attorney Sarah Chen, filed Freedom of Information Act requests that uncovered decades of classified documents related to anomalous primate encounters in national forests. The documents revealed a systematic program of evidence suppression and witness intimidation that had been ongoing since the 1960s. The classified documents revealed the existence of a joint military-civilian research program codenamed Project Wildman that had been studying these creatures for over 50 years. The program had documented hundreds of encounters, collected extensive biological samples, and even attempted limited communication with the beings. The research had been classified at the highest levels due to concerns about public panic and the potential impact on religious and scientific worldviews. David's life was forever changed by his discovery and the events that followed. He became a reluctant celebrity in the cryptozoology community while remaining a target of government harassment and surveillance. His private investigation business was destroyed by the controversy, but he found new purpose as an advocate for government transparency and the public's right to know about scientific discoveries. The harassment continued even after the footage's release, with David facing ongoing legal challenges, financial difficulties, and personal threats. However, he also received support from unexpected quarters, including former government officials who came forward to confirm the existence of classified programs studying these creatures. The footage that David captured in the forests of Northern California remains some of the most compelling evidence for Bigfoot's existence ever recorded. More importantly, it has opened a window into a hidden world that exists parallel to our own, challenging our assumptions about intelligence, consciousness, and humanity's place in the natural order. The creatures that David documented continue to live in the remote wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest, protected now not just by their own intelligence and stealth, but by government agencies that seem determined to keep their existence secret. The reasons for this secrecy remain unclear, but the implications are profound. If such remarkable beings can remain hidden in our modern world, what other wonders and mysteries await discovery in the wild places that still exist beyond the reach of civilization? David's story serves as a reminder that truth has a way of emerging despite the best efforts of those who would suppress it. His courage in releasing footage that powerful interests wanted to keep hidden has given the world a glimpse of possibilities that challenge our most basic assumptions about what we think we know. Sometimes the most important discoveries are the ones that certain people never want us to see. On March 9, 2023, a thermal drone clip surfaced online showing what appeared to be a tall figure dragging a human body through a forest clearing in Northern California. At first dismissed as a hoax, the footage soon drew attention from investigators and revealed a disappearance that no one could explain. A 30-second thermal drone video appeared online early in the morning on March 9, 2023. Someone posted it on a small Discord server that people used for tracking wildlife. The video showed two heat signatures moving across a clearing surrounded by thick forest. One figure stood upright. The other was lower and not moving. The taller figure appeared to drag the smaller shape by the arms. The ground was steep with drainage channels. There was no audio except the sound of drone rotors. Within hours, people started sharing the file on Reddit communities about cryptids. Different people gave it different titles when they reposted it. The version that spread most widely said it showed a Sasquatch dragging a body and described it as raw thermal footage that had leaked. The username of the original uploader matched an email address linked to Darren Klein. Klein ran a YouTube channel with over 2,000 subscribers. He made videos exposing fake Bigfoot content. He built his audience by recreating viral sightings and explaining how angles, lighting, or costumes could make ordinary footage look strange. His previous videos included ones about debunking sightings in the woods, faking thermal images with heaters, and explaining drone tricks with night vision. People watching assumed this new clip was part of another one of his experiments. The main difference was that he had not uploaded it to his YouTube page. Instead, it came from a file-sharing link in a private Discord chat. The file name was listed as 6riverstest_footage 1.mov. Volunteers from his most recent project used that chat. Darren Klein was 29 years old and lived in Redding, California. He studied media production for 2 years, but left college to work on content creation full-time. His work focused on what he called critical skepticism. He tried to prove that unusual claims could be explained through practical effects. He often worked with small teams of assistants and people who knew about lighting or drones. In February 2023, Klein announced a new series he planned to call Fake the Myth. Each episode would recreate famous cryptid footage using modern equipment like thermal imaging, motion sensors, and drones. He wanted to show how technology could change what evidence looked like. His first episode was supposed to be about Bigfoot sightings in Six Rivers National Forest near the California-Oregon border. People had been reporting sightings in that area for decades. The forest was remote and did not have much park supervision. He recruited 2 local volunteers through a filmmaking forum. One was Eli Ward, who was 23 years old. Eli had taken drone technology courses at a community college, but dropped out. He owned several custom-built drones and had done freelance aerial mapping for forestry contractors. He joined because he heard Klein needed help testing thermal sensors. Friends said later that Eli saw it as a way to build work samples for technical jobs. The other volunteer was Maya Rourke. She was a friend of Darren's who handled lighting and site coordination. The group planned to film over 3 nights. They would use heat pads and heavy clothing to create shapes that looked like creatures on camera. Planning notes that people later found in a shared Google Drive folder showed their setup. They planned to use 1 stationary thermal camera on a tripod and 1 drone flying an automatic grid pattern. Actors would walk along preset paths while carrying heat packs to make tall, uneven shapes on thermal cameras. On the second night, March 8th, weather reports showed temperatures in the mid-40s Fahrenheit with patchy fog along river valleys. The crew camped near an unpaved service road known as Mile Marker 12, several miles north of Willow Creek. Cell phone service was weak but worked near ridge lines. At 9:15 in the evening, Klein launched the main drone for calibration. GPS logs that online users released later showed a standard grid flight that lasted 23 minutes. He then recorded several controlled tests with Eli acting as the creature while Maya marked timing on a notepad. Around 10:30 in the evening, the group had a disagreement about battery usage. The portable generator was running low on fuel. Eli wanted to save power for transferring data. Klein wanted 1 more test before the fog got thicker. According to things Maya said online later, the argument ended with Eli packing up his controller case and walking back toward the vehicles. At 11:05 in the evening, the group's internal chat showed its last message from Eli. He said he would head back first and told them to save battery for the outro. Maya remembered seeing his flashlight move down the slope and disappear. The timeline of events that night went like this. At 9:15 in the evening, the drone calibration flight finished. At 10:30, the argument about the generator happened. At 11:05, Eli left the site and sent his last message. At 11:40, the drone battery was at 22%, and Klein started a final flight manually. At 12:10 in the morning, the flight log showed the connection was lost due to signal obstruction. At 12:18, the drone returned automatically to where it launched. Klein later told viewers in a short community post that all usable footage had been stored and backed up. He said it would be edited for an upcoming video. He did not mention anyone missing. 2 days later, an anonymous user with the handle river_heat posted a download link to the Discord group that had been organizing props and location details. The message only said to look closer at a frame glitch at 2:06 in the morning. The file's metadata showed it was created at 2:06:14 in the morning, Pacific time on March 9th. That was almost 2 hours after Klein said his last flight ended. People who first saw it assumed it was a mislabeled test or a reposted copy. The footage showed the same clearing and same rock outcrop, though, confirming it was recorded at the crew's location. Analysts extracted GPS, altitude, and battery data from the SRT telemetry bundled with the clip and EXIF on the master. The coordinates matched the Six Rivers locations in Klein's earlier uploads. The path data also showed the drone flew continuously from 2:01 to 2:08 in the morning. This suggested either an automated restart or someone manually launching it again during the night. The 2:01 to 2:08 a.m. path is not part of the earlier return to home sequence. It is a separate second sortie. By 9 in the morning, clips had reached larger forums. Titles varied. Some called it the real thermal capture of Sasquatch. Others said the debunker exposed himself or described it as leaked drone footage from 6 rivers. Users examined the video frame by frame. The most discussed timestamp was 2:06:27. At that point, the taller signature bends down and lifts the smaller form by the arms, then drags it downslope. The motion is steady and not rushed. The smaller shape's heat fades near the lower limbs, which would be consistent with reduced blood circulation. Klein's fans started tagging him in threads, asking for an explanation. He replied once from his verified Reddit account. He said it was part of a staged test and the clip was out of context. He said no one was hurt. He did not upload the footage to his own channel. Thermal analysts pointed out several things that did not make sense. The drone platform was a DJI Mavic 3T with a 640 by 512 thermal module. Its logs showed the aircraft could not self-launch from a motion or heat trigger. It needed either a manual command or a queued scheduled mission. Telemetry indicated the 2:01 a.m. flight began roughly 150 yards north of the original launch point. Battery data read as a fresh pack, meaning the system had been repowered and a new battery mounted before takeoff, at odds with Klein's earlier claim that the generator was shut down for the night. In later uploads, viewers noticed a brief light bloom in the upper corner of the frame between 2:05:42 and 2:05:45. It might have been a reflection from the drone's housing. When people increased the contrast, a second moving shape appeared faintly behind the main reflection. The outline appeared broader than a typical human profile, with an irregular thermal signature showing a cooler core and slightly warmer extremities, consistent with dense insulation, fur or layered fabric, plus humidity angle artifacts common in thermal imaging. A comparison that Reddit user OpenXIF posted overlaid known height ratios from Klein's past videos. The smaller heat source measured roughly 5 feet 8 inches when scaled to terrain markers. That height matched Eli Ward within a 2-inch margin. When people contacted Eli through comments, his social media accounts showed no new activity after March 8th. A family member later told a local paper that he had been out on a filming trip and was not back yet. At this point, most viewers still thought the leak was an intentional publicity stunt. Others started compiling a timeline of missing person filings. None mentioned the crew by name during the first week. By March 12th, tech blogs were covering the story. It was described as either a thermal hoax or a crime scene. One asked if the footage was a prank that sparked a real police inquiry. Links to Klein's earlier debunking videos gained thousands of new comments accusing him of making things up or covering something up. Screenshots circulated of private messages between him and moderators. In those messages, he claimed someone had hacked his drive. Image analysis threads kept finding new details. One post compared the heat bloom pattern to that of a large primate, based on limb proportion and stride spacing. Another suggested it could be a man in a ghillie suit carrying an injured partner. No one agreed on what it showed. Local forestry workers later told reporters they had seen a small campsite abandoned near mile marker 12. 2 folding chairs, a tent, and a drain generator battery were there. A half-empty fuel can sit nearby. There were no signs of a struggle, but someone found a controller case with Eli Ward's initials 30 feet from the tent. The discovery brought new attention online. People pointed out that if the drone relaunched automatically, someone would need to be near the equipment to reconnect batteries. If it was manual, either Klein or another person was there at 2 in the morning. Investigators later confirmed that both surviving members of the filming group, Darren Klein and Maya Rourke, were questioned as part of routine procedure. No formal charges were ever filed against either of them, and Rourke later left the project. On March 14th, a higher resolution copy of the footage appeared on YouTube. It included metadata overlays showing exact timestamps, battery level, and GPS readouts. This upload reached thousands of views within 48 hours before being removed for privacy concerns. Copies spread to other platforms. Independent analysts reconstructed the final frame sequence. At 2:06:21 in the morning, an upright heat signature entered the frame from the left. At 2:06:24, a second smaller signature was visible on the ground. At 2:06:27, the upright figure bent down and pulled the smaller body by the arms. At 2:06:33, both signatures moved downslope and the drone altitude ticked upward by about 5 feet, likely a brief obstacle avoid rise or terrain hold fluctuation. At 2:06:38, there was secondary movement behind the main reflection. At 2:06:45, the feed showed a static and lost signal. This sequence became the freeze frame most shared in articles and discussion videos. It was the first public evidence suggesting that the hoax footage might show an actual disappearance rather than a staged scene. Later walkthroughs noted scuffed duff and short parallel tracks downslope from the clearing, subtle but consistent with a body being dragged rather than carried. By the end of that week, nearly every repost had the same title. It said the footage showed a Sasquatch dragging a human body and described it as leaked thermal drone footage. After the high-resolution copy spread across platforms, online communities started analyzing it frame by frame. A Reddit thread became the main place for data review. Members pulled coordinates, flight logs, and temperature gradients using free software available to the public. People cross-referenced the embedded timestamps with Klein's original posts. They discovered the file was created at 2:06 in the morning, nearly 3 hours after the time Klein said filming ended. That difference became the starting point for what viewers began calling the timeline gap. A user named Data Anchor compared the leaked GPS data to the model's standard flight radius. He confirmed that the drone had lifted from a slightly different location, roughly 150 yards north of the original camp. The coordinates matched the ridge overlooking a narrow drainage channel leading to the creek. The metadata also showed a full battery charge and normal system temperature. This meant the drone had been reconnected to power before flight. The battery had not been low or overheating, as Klein said earlier. Within 2 days, a small group of tech-savvy volunteers released a detailed spreadsheet listing all recovered values from the file. One column marked user interaction time contained a hidden string reading 2:01:09 Pacific Time with a note saying manual input detected. It suggested that someone had physically tapped the drone controller or mobile interface at that moment. As the discussion expanded, someone found a missing person alert that had been sent to local rangers on March 15th. It listed Eli Ward, last seen on March 8th near mile marker 12, wearing a gray jacket and hiking boots. That information linked the footage to a real person rather than a simulation. Shortly after, a volunteer surfaced Eli's public Strava activity, auto-synced from his watch. The track and heart rate data run until 1:43 a.m., when both stopped suddenly. Investigators noted the drone's 2:01 a.m. launch occurred roughly 18 minutes after the watch data stopped. When both data sets were put on a graph, the path of Eli's last recorded movement ran parallel to the drone's flight coordinates for roughly 6 minutes before both signals ended at nearly the same GPS point. That alignment convinced many that Eli had still been in the area when the drone relaunched. No one could explain how the aircraft powered on or why its route matched a person's final recorded steps. Attention shifted to the Mavic 3T's behavior on the ground. Technicians noted its sensors can wake displays or prompt a pre-flight screen if powered and jostled, but they do not command liftoff. Recreation showed sudden temperature or motion near a stowed powered aircraft could trigger a brief wake, yet a manual input or a scheduled mission was still required to launch. That narrowed theories to 2. Someone on site executed a manual or scheduled launch, or a watchdog reboot resumed a queued mission after power was restored. A pure motion-triggered takeoff was ruled out by technicians. Discussion threads are divided into camps labeled manual launch, automatic wake, and staged upload. Each tried to account for the 2-hour timeline gap and Eli's disappearance. By mid-March, analysis reached single-frame detail. At frame 1842, viewers isolated a partial reflection at the edge of the screen. likely from a wet surface or metallic object. When the brightness curve was flattened, another motion trace appeared behind the reflection. It moved independently from the main heat signatures. It was broad-shouldered and irregular. The central temperature zone was colder than the surrounding outline, which would suggest dense surface coverage, such as heavy fur or layered clothing. A user compared the stride length to known human walking data. The ratio of shoulder width to leg length did not match typical human proportions. Other users said that sensor flare or double exposure could create the illusion of a second figure. The debate produced hundreds of diagrams, overlays, and simplified motion maps. But no one agreed. Around the same time, screenshots from a private Discord channel appeared. The messages were supposedly from Klein's project group, dated March 8th through 9th. In one, Klein wrote at 1:48 in the morning that the battery was still dropping and something was moving near the creek. He said he was staying up until the signal cleared. A later message at 1:52 in the morning said he was getting interference again and could not lock the GPS. The final message from the thread simply said that movement was registered north of camp. The authenticity of these logs could not be verified, but the timestamps matched the period when Eli's smartwatch last recorded movement. After the leak, Klein deleted the entire Discord server and restricted comments on his public channels. On March 18th, a local newspaper quoted an unnamed ranger from Six Rivers National Forest, confirming that a missing person search had been conducted near mile marker 12. The ranger declined to give details, but mentioned thermal imaging provided by civilians. 2 days later, a partial copy of an internal incident report appeared anonymously on an image site. A redacted header and cropped pagination were visible. The text stated that a subject was located in a drainage basin. Human remains were present and partial, consistent with scavenger activity. Evidence of animal hair contamination was noted during recovery. No name was listed, and the document did not specify whether the remains were identified. Independent reporters tried to verify the leak, but the Forest Service declined to comment, citing ongoing analysis. Under growing pressure, Klein held a short live stream on March 21st. He spoke for 12 minutes, appearing tired and defensive. He said the footage had been stolen from a test archive and repeated that no one had been injured during filming. When viewers asked about Eli, he replied that everyone left the site fine and claimed the missing person report was unrelated. At the 8-minute mark, he insisted the drone's time settings were off by hours due to a firmware error. Viewers noticed a blinking red reflection behind him, consistent with the LED cadence of a DJI controller. Screenshots circulated online within minutes. Following the stream, Klein's social media accounts went private. Several of his older debunking videos disappeared, and comment sections filled with speculation that he was under investigation. There was no official statement confirming that. By late March, volunteers from Northern California's hiking forums organized small ground searches around the coordinates from the footage. They documented their findings publicly. They found abandoned fire rings, discarded food packaging, and a piece of torn reflective fabric. None showed clear evidence of a struggle. Local authorities advised against independent searches, citing rough terrain and wildlife hazards. A spokesperson said that civilian interference might compromise ongoing analysis. Still, new clips appeared daily. Some claimed to show additional heat traces from nearby areas. Most were proven to be misidentified animals or lens artifacts. A few channels compiled all available drone data into a reconstruction video. They plotted every coordinate, battery level, and temperature reading into a 3D terrain model. The path showed the drone descending twice toward the creek before its final loss of signal. Each descent lined up with brief signal spikes in Eli's smartwatch log. At 2:06 in the morning, both devices registered a loss of connection at the same time. The smartwatch log ended with a sharp heart rate spike, then flatline. The drone's telemetry showed sudden pitch movement upward, then complete data cut. Experts noted that such a simultaneous loss suggested close proximity between subject and aircraft, within 20 to 30 feet. On April 1st, a regional environmental blog published an interview with a park employee who spoke anonymously. He described internal briefings, warning staff to avoid speculation about unverified biological evidence. He mentioned that some of the sample bags from the recovery site were marked as hair, non-human, pending lab classification. The same source said the samples were later transferred to a state laboratory in Sacramento, but no results had been released. Officials again declined comment, only confirming that environmental samples were under standard review. By April 5th, online focus moved from analyzing the footage to questioning why no formal statement had been issued. Discussion threads compared the case to past viral mysteries, where authorities held back results while waiting for confirmation. Others noticed that search results for the Six Rivers drone leak began disappearing from many platforms due to copyright or privacy claims filed by Klein. Several mirror sites archived everything before the takedown. The case now existed mostly through re-uploads, Reddit posts, and investigative compilations. Meanwhile, former viewers of Klein's debunking content expressed divided opinions. Some said he had been framed or hacked. Others believed he had captured something real and was pressured to take it back. On April 9th, a short live broadcast appeared on an unverified channel. The stream lasted less than 5 minutes. Klein, seated in a dim room, stated that he would not discuss Six Rivers again. He added that all project files had been transferred for review and that people should stop editing things they did not understand. Before ending the stream, he looked off camera and asked someone to kill the feed. Viewers heard a faint rotor whine in the background, possibly a fan or a drone powering up, before the screen went black. That was his last known public appearance. By mid-April, no additional footage appeared. The official missing person record for Eli Ward remained open but inactive. Online researchers continued to update their compilations, noting that every available data source, including video, GPS, and smartwatch logs, ended within seconds of one another. To date, no conclusive explanation has been released for the sequence captured on the drone or for the presence of multiple heat signatures in the final seconds of the recording. By May 2023, the official search in Six Rivers National Forest had ended. The missing person case for Eli Ward was marked as inactive. Ward was presumed deceased. No public announcement named any suspect or identified remains. Local papers printed short updates, each citing insufficient evidence to confirm the cause of death. The Ward family declined interviews. Neighbors in Redding told reporters the family had moved out of state. A short statement posted through a friend's account asked for privacy and requested that online speculation stop out of respect. No new information came from the Forest Service. Requests for the internal report were denied under exemption clauses for active analysis. A spokesperson from the county sheriff's office said that physical material was still being evaluated, but no results were ever published. By early summer, the Six Rivers drone story was no longer covered by known outlets. What remained existed mostly and was limited in archived forum threads, video compilations, and mirrors of the original upload. The leaked clip itself continued to reappear under new titles every few weeks. Each version claimed to be the original. Some were cropped, some colorized, and others slowed or stabilized. Viewers studying the footage often argued about subtle differences between versions. In some, the reflection at frame 1842 seemed brighter. In others, the secondary motion appeared later by a fraction of a second. Analysts who compared compression patterns concluded that nearly all copies were re-encoded and degraded multiple times. This made it impossible to confirm what the untouched file looked like. A small community of independent researchers kept trying to verify the timeline. They built online maps combining public GPS data, ranger reports, and local weather readings. The most detailed compilation was hosted by a small group. They logged every digital event connected to the case. This included the drone launch, the smartwatch heartbeat, and the final server ping from Klein's deleted account. The graph showed all 3 lines ending within 8 seconds of one another. In late May, a local outdoor magazine published an interview with two hikers who had recently visited the mile marker 12 area. They described intermittent signal loss and battery drain in a narrow section of the ridge. One said his thermal monocular briefly failed to register returns for several seconds, a cold gap likely caused by fog humidity, sensor non-uniformity correction, or angle-to-surface effects. Park officials later said environmental interference could cause similar readings in damp conditions. During the same week, screenshots circulated of a short clip posted to a forgotten side channel. The video lasted 18 seconds. It showed a computer monitor displaying thermal static. White noise patterns moved across a black screen. At the 5-second mark, a faint heat silhouette appeared for 2 frames before fading. Then the image pixelated and cut to black. No sound accompanied the recording. The upload date was April 28th, 19 days after Klein's final live stream. The account was deleted less than an hour after the clip went up. Online users debated whether the upload was genuine. Some said it matched his past equipment layout. Others thought it was a fabrication made to extend interest in the story. No verification ever followed. By June, search teams had stopped returning to the area. Seasonal growth had covered most of the old campsites. Only small items remained in rangers' evidence storage. These included a fuel can, a partial tent pole, and one damaged drone propeller recovered downstream. Occasionally, local residents mentioned seeing private vehicles parked near the trailheads at night. Rangers noted increased trespassing reports, but found nothing suspicious when checking the sites. The 6 Rivers footage never disappeared completely. It continued to circulate in private groups and off-platform archives. Each new repost drew temporary waves of interest before fading again. Several amateur documentaries used the material under fair use claims. They paired it with voiceover analyses of digital evidence chains. Others focused on inconsistencies in Klein's explanations. These included his timeline, his missing backup drives, and the vanished raw files from his Google account. In one podcast interview months later, a former collaborator who worked with Klein on earlier debunking projects said he had become withdrawn after the incident. According to her, he avoided public contact and refused to discuss anything involving 6 Rivers or drones. By late 2023, only a few details remained uncontested. The leaked file was real and originated from one of Klein's drones. The timestamps aligned with the period when Eli Ward went missing. The drone and smartwatch data ended within seconds of each other. Everything else stayed unresolved. Researchers reviewing recovered logs often quoted the same technical note that circulated from early discussions. In the final recovered frame, 2 heat signatures remain visible. One was prone, one standing still. The second figure moves first. No one has confirmed what the second figure was. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.